commission was given on a Monday morning. 3 words. The master of the forge stood at the head of the workshop, his hands at his sides, and looked at the 3 apprentices in turn. He did not explain himself. He did not soften what he was about to say with context or instruction. He said, "Forge me power," then walked to his bench and did not speak again. The 3 apprentices were given 3 days and the full use of the workshop. They did not confer. Each man went to his own anvil. Each man understood what had been asked. There was nothing unclear about it. The word had been given. The commission was plain. The first apprentice's name was Kale. He had grown up on a farm at the edge of a contested land. He had watched his father negotiate boundaries with neighbors who had more men and larger holdings. He had watched arguments fail. He had watched reason fail. He had watched his father stand in the yard one morning and say nothing because there was nothing left to say. What had worked in the end was mass. Kale worked the iron for 2 days without stopping. The piece he produced was a maul. The head as wide as a man's chest. The handle worn smooth where he had gripped it. It took both arms to lift it. It would drive a stake through stone. He set it on the floor beside the anvil and looked at it with something close to satisfaction. The second apprentice's name was Davin. He had come to the forge from the city. He did not speak much about what he had done before, but his hands were quick and his movements were economical in a way that did not come from smithing alone. He understood power differently, not as a weight, but as precision, as the capacity to reach the one point that could not be defended. He worked slowly. The piece he produced was a stiletto, the blade no wider than 2 fingers, tapered to a point that caught no light. It weighed almost nothing. It would pass between ribs without resistance. He set it on a bench and did not look at it again. The third apprentice was called Marin. He had been raised in a house where the violence was quiet and consistent and never acknowledged as such. He had learned early that force met with force only brought more force. What endured was what could absorb, redirect, and return. What he produced was a whip, a length of braided steel that moved like water. It required almost no strength to use, only timing. He coiled it carefully and hung it from a hook above his station. On the 3rd morning, the master came to the center of the workshop. He examined each piece in silence. He lifted the maul with both hands and set it down. He held the stiletto to the light and set it down. He took the whip from its hook, let it fall to its full length, and hung it back. He stepped back and said nothing. The 3 apprentices stood with their work between them. Kale looked at the stiletto. It was a needle. It was a thing for the dark. He could not see what the commission had to do with it. Davin looked at the maul. It was a tool for men who had no other options, blunt and without thought. And Marin looked at both. The silence held. The master returned to his bench and the apprentices remained where they were. Kale's eyes moved from the stiletto to his maul and then down to his hands. The width of them, the thickness of the knuckles, the way they had always been the size of his father's hands. He stood with that for a moment. He did not speak. He did not move. Three men heard the same word. 3 men stood at their anvils with the same commission, the same time, and the same materials. What they produced had nothing in common, not because they were different smiths, because they were different men, and every man builds from what he already carries. That is the thing that most men do not examine. They assume that when they perceive something, a word, a situation, or a person, they are perceiving it, the thing itself, directly. But they are not. What they are perceiving is the thing as it has passed through everything they have already lived. Every association formed before they were old enough to question it. Every lesson absorbed from a house, a street, a series of events that left a particular mark. The word arrives intact, but the meaning does not. It is reconstructed on the other side from completely different materials. Kale heard the word power, and his hands knew the answer before his mind did. He did not decide to build the maul. He recognized it. It was the only shape the word had ever had for him. The shape that had finally worked when argument had failed, when reason had failed, when his father stood in the yard with nothing left to say. Mass had worked. Mass was power. The word and the object were, for Kale, the same thing. He was not wrong about his own life. He was wrong to assume his life was the measure of anything beyond himself. David reached the same conclusion by a different route. The stiletto was not a guess. It was a precise answer to a precise question. The question his life had spent years asking him. Where is the point that cannot be defended? How do you reach it before they see you coming? He had learned in the city that the man with the most iron rarely wins. The man who controls the moment of contact wins. That was power. He was not wrong about his own life either. Two men, one word, two entirely different objects. And each man looked at the other's work with something close to contempt, not because the other man had failed, because the other man's answer was incomprehensible. It did not match the word as they knew it. It did not match the world as they had lived it, so it could not be right. This is the error, not the maul, not the stiletto, not even the certainty itself. The error is the assumption underneath it, that what a man has lived is sufficient evidence for what is generally true. A man has one life. He knows it in extraordinary detail. He is the leading authority on it, and it tells him almost nothing about anyone else's. The problem is not that he lacks information. The problem is that he does not know he lacks it. His experience feels complete. It feels like ground. It has the texture and weight of fact, so he stands on it and calls it the world. Every piece of information a man receives about the world has already been through someone else's hands before it reaches him. The account his father gave him, the conclusions his street taught him, the particular lesson repeated until it becomes his truth. None of it arrived unfiltered. None of it was the original. And then a man takes that inherited, distorted, already interpreted material and builds his understanding of everything outside himself on top of it. Marin understood something Kale and David did not. Not because he was wiser, because his life had taught him, at considerable cost, that force applied in one direction often returns from another. The whip was not a better answer. It was his answer, shaped by a house where direct resistance brought more pressure, not less. He was not wrong about his own life either. All three of them were right about their own lives. All three of them made the same mistake. They took the single life they had lived and treated it as a reliable map of everything that lay beyond it. The master set each piece down and said nothing. He did not choose because the commission had never been about the object. A man who has lived through particular hardship does not carry that hardship as information. He carries it as certainty. It has the same weight, the same authority, but it occupies the space where a question should be. Is what I build here actually true? Or is it only true for me? Most men never ask it. The certainty sits where the question should be, and the man proceeds. That is the cost. Not ignorance, not stupidity. A sample of one held as evidence for everything. A life lived, mistaken for the world.